Is Jess here? Oh, there he is. All right. Hey, buddy. Jess is a very old friend of mine who understands not only all the problems and issues and challenges facing the world, but also has a very keen and unique knowledge of a lot of the solutions. In fact, I think if I kicked the bucket and fell dead right now, I would tell everybody in my dying words here to say, listen to this guy, because he knows a lot about this stuff. He really, really does. If I really had to pick one person to take my place, it would be him. And I really mean that. I've never told you that before, but Jess is really just a super, super nice guy. And he's traveled to so many different places. He's been very successful in business. He, and he's done this stuff himself. And so he has a unique and intimate knowledge, just as I do, having traveled to so many places, having actually done this stuff myself, having done business in so many different countries and built businesses. Jess has done one thing that I haven't, and that is that Jess has dropped off his US passport and said, thanks guys, but I don't need this anymore. It hasn't gotten to that point for me. For me, it's a very rational, kind of objective thing. People say, oh, Simon, why haven't you done that yet? Because I don't need to. I have my own reasons. I feel I don't have any emotion tied up with my U.S. passport. I still have it because it has utility for me at a very limited cost, because I don't really spend any time there. So the cost for me is actually quite low. There is a certain point perhaps where that cost will be higher and the benefit will be low, and I wouldn't have any problem turning it in if I start seeing changes in trends. But what I wanted to do is, I asked Jess to come because rather than talk about renunciation from an academic perspective and say, well, here's the law and here's this and here's that, it's not an academic exercise. For many people, it's a very personal thing. It can be a very emotional thing. There's a human story behind it. And so that's why I asked Jess to come, because I really want you to understand the human story behind renunciation of citizenship and hear it, firsthand, straight from the horse's mouth. And this is by far, I think, the most qualified guy to do it, because like I said, not only has he done it, but he's incredibly knowledgeable about all the things that we've been talking about. So I really, honestly, I thank you for joining us again. He gets absolutely nothing out of this whatsoever. He was just kind enough to come out, and I'll tell the story. I was sitting with the other night, was that on Thursday, I think it was, or Friday? And he came up to me, it was Friday afternoon. And he came up to me and he goes, hey, I went out to the park up there and I was hanging out looking at the statue. You would never believe who I saw. And I said, who? He said, Ron Paul. And I said, you're kidding. He goes, yeah, man, it's like he's here on vacation. He's here with his family. He said, it was the damnedest thing. And I said, well, did you talk to him? He said, well, yeah, it's Ron Paul. How could I not talk to him? So I went up and I said hello, and Dr. Paul asked me, what are you doing here? And I'm with this Sovereign Man event. And, Sovereign Man? I think I heard of them.
He said, I think I might come by.
Maybe I'll come by. And so he's telling me the story. He goes, oh, man, it'd be so great if he came by, but he's not going to come by. Come on, let's face it. I go, yeah, well, it'd be nice, but, it's not going to happen.
So, you can fit him in.
Right. So, of course, inside I was just laughing hysterically. It was just a couple hours later that we brought him out and I introduced him to Jess. So that was a nice surprise for my old friend. So, Jess is, as I mentioned, an accomplished investor and writer and perpetual traveler who just came to us from Cape Town, South Africa. You're a resident of South Africa, right?
Yeah, I just got my permanent residency.
Your permanent residency in South Africa. You want to start back and kind of talk about the story a little bit? And we've kind of mentioned the background. Is there anything else that you might be important to the background story that I didn't mention?
Well, when you were talking to Julio, I was reminiscing about Panama. That was taking me back, because we've been in contact for years, and it reminded me of our mutual history. I've also lived in Panama. I spent about a year, and so I also have a bit of a love-hate relationship. We talk about the traffic with kind of mock fondness. Some people enjoy the circle of death. I'm not one of them. There are some interesting...
That's a traffic circle around town. We've lovingly nicknamed the Circle of Death.
Yeah, they have these buses that come through, and if you're not looking one way, they'll be on the right side, and as soon as you look right, they go on the left side, and next thing you know, you've sweated your shirt out, and you've been in the car for about 15 seconds. So it can be interesting there. But anyway, I got my start. I was in real estate, and I had a business that I did well with, like most people before the crash. So life was a lot easier then for me. And I decided that I would like to look offshore, and I would like to, I saw the trend in 2005. Things had already softened, and although we're used to seeing the collapse in 2007 and 8, it was fairly clear to me where we were headed. I saw the trajectory and decided to go to Panama and do everything that everybody here is doing now, essentially setting up a corporation, setting up trusts and various entities, protect myself both legally and financially.
This was in 2005, you said?
This was in 2005, and Panama was just being opened up then. I think Panama was being promoted. And I stepped in just about every hole financially and otherwise that you can step in, sprained a few ankles and learned some valuable lessons. But so I did everything the hard way, and I'm amazed that so many people are here getting to meet so many of these experts and bankers and coming to one location is just such a treat, I have to say. It's really amazing because I had to do it all by myself, and I did it one at a time, and I learned the hard way. And I met a lot of people that, you know, they were maybe a little shady or they were taking advantage of my inexperience. Right. So coming through on the other side of this, I've flown to Georgia, for instance, to open up my bank account. Many of you are doing this opening here. So I learned the hard way, and we've shared in that. It's been interesting because when I finally decided to leave the US behind in my rearview mirror, we had a conversation about it, and now you're seeing two fairly similar guys, similar age, both successful, both travelers, and one decided to leave and the other didn't. So it's going to be interesting to maybe compare and contrast a bit.
The decision, you started this in 2005, and you didn't necessarily start off with this because you said, you know what, I'm done, I don't want to be in the US anymore. It was a gradual progression for you. So, I mean, what were the things, what was your kind of, I mean, I talk about this sort of the aha moment and the breaking point and everything. What was the thoughts and the emotions kind of leading up to that?
Well, it was a difficult decision, but it was one that the motive of this decision, the kernel, is one that many of you have already experienced, I'm sure, or may experience in the future, which is how do you live offshore? How do you move your money offshore? How do you make this function in your life? And as you know, the US, we've heard from some amazing speakers here about the FACTA, about these trajectories, about this loss of liberty, and this increasing push worldwide. I think the connection between what we heard from Dr. Ron Paul and from some of the other speakers is that there is basically, I think, you know, something you'd see in Europe. You could identify that with a certain group of political, what Mr. Farage kept mentioning as a political will, and an insane one, and something that maybe the people didn't want. But I think you can step back and see that this is being pushed from many different perspectives and globally. And I think when you look at the target audience, it's basically Americans. Americans have the most trouble internationally, as we know, opening bank accounts. So when I was in Panama, I got that awkward phone call several times from bankers where I had operated accounts with a fair amount of funds in there, and I never had a problem or was overdraft, and I got the call and said, well, you really need to close your account and you need to move your money in about 3 days, and let us know if that's a problem for you. I said, well, explain a little bit more about that, because it feels like there's still waters, and suddenly you see that there's obviously roiling currents. There's obviously things that are happening, legislation that's being passed, conversations being made.
And that was happening a lot. That was happening a lot where people, I mean, I've got very close friends who had accounts in places they had for even decades, and all of a sudden got a Dear John letter that said, you know, you've got, 72 hours to move all your money out, or we've taken the liberty of shutting down your account, tell us where you'd like us to send the funds, right. Which creates a massive problem, really, really big problem.
I had another interesting experience. I had a friend in Panama who operated the Perth Mint dealership, and he was basically drummed out of the business because he's an American, and he had so much trouble with his clientele, with this banking issues in Panama, that he eventually wasn't able to operate, and he's since moved back to Santa Barbara and works in Costa Rica now. So I've actually witnessed friends who have actually been pushed out of they've lost their business, their livelihood because of these issues. So at some point you reach your breaking point, and that breaking point for me was constantly looking over my shoulder, was the expense and the effort of opening up these whatever they are, your trusts, which really is a significant word, because you do end up trusting the people that you work with, and not everybody deserves that trust. So you definitely don't sleep as well at night when you're operating with people that you're not that familiar with, and you're using those people to run a business, for instance, or to help your family, to plan for their future, and so it's a very stressful situation sometimes, so my parents rely on me to help them with their planning, and they also have lived offshore. So at some point I realized the obvious, glaring solution, the final solution, if you will, is to leave all this FACTA and all this reporting and all this, these issues in the rearview mirror. And it doesn't come without some consequences, obviously, and I can tell you about that. I have a St. Kitts.
Well, hold on. We'll get into that.
Get it ahead. But
bottom line for you is it was almost something that was very rational, looking at all the kind of there's a cost and benefit of everything, and so you're looking at the cost, saying, I'm tired of all the compliance. At what point for you was because there's the other side of the equation is the benefit. So at what point were you saying, U.S. passport is just not that much of a benefit for me?
Well, I think it really depends on your situation, and I know that's a vague answer.
But for you, I mean, your situation.
For me,
Can you hold the mic up?
Yeah, for me, it was something where I wasn't actively doing business in the U.S. I changed from developing real estate projects to trading online and to working as a futures trader. So for me, I could live anywhere in the world, and often do. Not having those ties, not having something that would hold me back from a business perspective. Obviously, there's familial ties still. There are people there. But at some point, you begin to weigh the cost, and to be honest, I don't think anybody can really be aware of the downside, because there's just simply not that much information out there. There's so few people that have been through it, and if they've been through it, they really don't publish that much. Maybe a few blogs here and there.
Right.
So it's one of these things where you sometimes just have to go do it yourself. I did try to gather as much as I could, but for me, it's also a little. It's definitely not just financial, and it's definitely political as well. I also don't really agree with what's happening in the U.S., and I definitely don't. I have my political side, so I don't want to be responsible for these drone attacks and these foreign incursions, and I don't want that also, whether you want to call it karmic or any other sort of responsibility that you might take on.
You just don't want to participate in that system.
I don't want to participate in it, and I don't want to support it.
So, I mean, the big thing that obviously a lot of people look at cost and benefit, and for them, obviously, most folks, the major benefit of maintaining that U.S. citizenship is to be able to remain in the U.S., travel in and out of the U.S. How is that not a factor for you? You had obviously been living overseas for a while, but did you just figure, you know what, it's not that big of a deal. I'll always be able to go back if I want to. I can just apply for a visa with another passport. How much of that was a factor for you?
Well, that's definitely a factor. I was under the misapprehension that you can immediately receive a 10-year visa and go right back into the U.S. Most of the people who have expatriated have had pretty good success with that. So my first instinct was, you have the best of both worlds. You don't have any of these compliance issues, and then you can certainly visit friends and family. Well, that didn't turn out to be my case. So my story is there's a warning side to it as well.
Sure. And I just kind of to point that out, you mentioned something, there's just not really any information out there. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I mean, you might be one of the first guys to ever step forward out into the light and say, this is what I did, this is how I did it, and tell that story very personally. So, I mean, it's a really great thing. When was it that you, I guess, when you first started thinking about it, you started kind of your offshore experience in '05. When was it you really started thinking, you know what, I'm tired of this. I want to go ahead and make that transition. At least started thinking about it.
Well, it's not a very romantic story. Unfortunately, there was no aha moment. What it was I flew out to San Diego and I met with this wonderful international tax attorney. And he's a bit of a Rain Man when it comes to international tax. He has the entire code, most of it in his head. So he's a bit of a savant. And I said, so how does one do this? How does one live offshore? How does one protect one's assets? And I got IRS tax code, whatever, and this and that. And I just felt myself lifting out of my body. I was drifting around the room, lost track of time. I got dizzy. And I said, oh my God, you have to summarize this for me. How much am I paying you per hour? Wait, can you just give me a one-line description of what I need to do? And this guy said, okay, so IRS, A and B are different from C. And C is and he went back into it. And I thought, that's just the answer. The answer is this is extremely complex. And you are lucky if you're not going to touch one or two of the spider webs that are dangling everywhere in the world. For instance, if you are, and this, of course, I don't wear a suit, so I don't want to be confused as an expert. But if anybody operates an offshore trust and they think they've checked all the boxes, there's a very good chance that the IRS simply just treats your trust as a domestic trust. And they can pierce anything at any time. There's really nothing, if you're talking about what Ron Paul mentioned about the breakdown of rule of law, well, what makes you think the IRS can't just pierce things and make their own definitions and freeze assets as they come running through the country and make you explain it later? The burden of proof is suddenly on you. And so, yes, you can make your plans as best you may, but at some point you realize that it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of really good expertise. And I just didn't want to deal with it anymore, to be honest. It just wasn't worth it.
He raised a very good point. There are a lot of instances in which I think folks go through and particularly get not necessarily the greatest advice and go down certain roads that end up being counterproductive, and they take on unnecessary risks and all sorts of things. I mean, it's not always the simplest path. And so for you, it was just a question of, all right, I just don't want to deal with it anymore. And so, when was that? That was in 2000?
That was in 2011. I moved to South Africa, and it begins to build on one side. And the only thing on the other side is this passport. And you begin to feel that how it tips for you and what the benefit is. And I felt that it was tipping in that favor to go ahead and go through the process.
Before that, you went down to St. Kitts.
Right.
And when was that?
Well, I decided to purchase the St. Kitts passport, and again, things don't happen as quickly as you are led to believe, and so this what turned out to be what I was promised to be a 4-month process turned out to be almost a 9-month process, and at the end of that, it changes things a little bit. You're paying for time and you're paying for expediency, and in the end, it didn't really work out that way, but.
When did you go down there at first?
I wasn't down there in 2010.
2010, right.
So I went down to pick up the passport in case anybody wanted to ask me about what St. Kitts looks like. I can tell them now. I've been there once.
Right.
Can we skip ahead to a travel document, or should we just continue with?
Yeah, let's get to that. Let's get to that later. So you did the St. Kitts back then. It was how much? Because the price has gone up a couple of times since
they've
then.
raised the price $50,000. So they still publish that it's $200,000 for an individual, $35,000 fee, and there's some various other administrative costs, $3,500 here and there. So it adds up, and the total was about $285, I think, for me.
When you did it.
Yeah, and now it's around $300. So they've raised the price. Right. And it's a really popular program. They were just so backlogged. I think they have a tremendous amount of Chinese people with a lot of money that are in the program, a lot of Middle Easterners. I mean, there's just a lot of people trying to get out of their situation, have other options.
Yeah, I wrote about this several times. I remember being at an offshore conference in Shanghai with this room full of wealthy Chinese people, and I think there was some big cheese from St. Kitts that was out there, and I remember thinking to myself, I walked out and I said, there's no way the price stays the same. We're going to wake up one day and this thing's going to cost $1 million.
Right.
They raised it by 50 grand. I'm surprised they didn't raise it even more, because you're right, it's tremendously popular, and mostly with Chinese and the oddball Russian and things like that.
And it's bogged down the administration of this document.
Right, sure.
And so that's what took so long for my document to get produced.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's a 9-month process it was a 9-month process for you. You walked out of it finally, and you've got your St. Kitts passport. I think I remember the day. I think you wrote me when you got it finally in the mail. That was a good day.
Yeah, it was a good day.
And so now you're sitting there. Now you're a dual national. You've got U.S. and St. Kitts citizenship, and eventually you moved to South Africa and decided that you wanted to hang out down there, which is a beautiful country. And I think I remember the day when you walked in to the consulate in Cape Town, which I've been to many times as well, and you said you went in just because you were seeking information. You went in and made the mistake of walking into the consulate and saying, "Hey, just wonder if I could get some information about renouncing citizenship."
Hi, I just like some forums.
Yeah. So how did they react to that?
I call it the castle. They need some crocodiles in their moat, to make it all complete.
Not well.
Yeah, it's intimidating always to go into a U.S. consulate. So, anyway, they were very keen to talk to me further, very quickly, and I realized that I had already stepped in it, and wasn't prepared. I went in to just get the forms, which is something that they provide for you if anyone here is actually. I'm just curious. Is anybody here actually considering expatriating? Can anybody? Wow, a lot more than I would have thought. Okay.
Well, the forms are available online, so you don't have to go to the... I wish you'd asked me that. Hey, man, you know where the forms are? They're online.
Well, there's a little bit of confusion, actually, about the forms, and they actually publish the forms and give them to you anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But, yeah, I actually went in there more to feel it out. I wanted to see if this was... I was embassy shopping, I wanted to see if this embassy was how it felt and how the people are. There are places that you can do it all around the world, and you can certainly look at the jurisdictions that you think might be not quite so, I don't know what the word is, organized, pissed off, I don't know. How do you say this? It's just,
well, no, you raise a good point, because these are, all of these consulates around the world, consulate to consulate to consulate, they're all different. They all they're filled with different bureaucrats with different attitudes and different views and different levels of knowledge. They all think different things, know different things, have different versions of forms and things like this. So depending on where you go, you might get completely different answers and different attitudes. And I guess you got somebody on a bad day who is a little bit hostile, curious, interrogative.
Yes, all of the above. Well, they have the little bulletproof glass, and unfortunately, I had this fantasy that I was going to meet with a real person and have a conversation like we're having across the table, like civilized people. Well, unfortunately, you're speaking through Lexan glass, and you have the prison phone, and you have to explain yourself to somebody while you're standing there, with the bright lights in your face, and unless you're prepared, you can stumble. So she asked me, okay, well, why do you want to do this? And the first thing I said was, well, I have my reasons. Stalling for time. And she said, and what are those reasons?
The answer is, none of your business, really. I mean, really, it's not.
They actually wouldn't give me the forms. They wouldn't actually talk to me unless I told them why I had this idea in my head, this crazy idea I could leave. And I said, well, okay, I have my political reasons. Is that enough? She said, no, that's not enough. You really need to explain yourself today.
It's like she was fishing.
Yeah.
She wanted you to say.
So then I began to say, okay, the U.S. is diverging its political views from mine. And she stopped me and she said, well, what I see here is I see tax evasion. That's what I see here today. Well, I said, it's not. What are you going to say? And I got quite upset about it, and my heart started beating, and I thought, wow, I'm really getting grilled here right off the get-go. So she caught me off guard. So my advice to anybody who's considering it, think about it, write it down. Definitely don't try to go in there and ad-lib, unless you're good at that. Even then, write it down. They expect you to write it down. You can just pass it to them. So I was caught off guard. And so at that point, I said, well, I'm just going to go. I'm just going to cut my losses, go home, and think about what I've done here today or haven't done. And they said, well, that's okay. We're just going to start a file for you. And I said, well, I don't really want to, give you any information. I'm not ready for that. And she said, well, we already have your passport. That's okay. We got a copy of it when you came in the front door. So they're prepared. They're thinking 2 steps ahead. So when I came in the next day, they opened up my file, my dossier, and they had all my information in there. So you just, my advice is definitely think ahead and make sure you're prepared and make sure you've thought it through.
I remember the day, and you wrote me, you sent me an email, and you were freaking out. I think it was right after that, and you would not believe what just happened. And when we talked about it for a little bit, and then you went back in. How long was it when you went back in to actually do the deed with the forms and everything?
Took a couple days to calm down, and
Yeah.
then I went back in there, and by that time I had written some stuff out. And it really once that was, I was through that moment, the other people that work there are just fine. They have 450 employees or 460 employees that work at this one embassy. It's a huge complex, and most of them are South African, and they're quite friendly, and they don't really have anything at stake, and they're very nice. And so they were like, oh well, this is just the forms, and you have to fill these things out, and you have to do all this theatrics, with your hand up in the air and one hand down, and you have to repeat all these.
Well, here's the thing. I got a copy
and,
of the State Department's manual on this, and there actually are instructions where they say, in there, I should try and find this where I had it and send it out to everybody, because it actually says, you need to really go out of your way to be as dramatic as possible and make the renunciant realize everything that he's giving up. And so they tell you, they tell the consular officials in this manual to bring out all these American flags and put together this stupid ceremony where you have to recite something and all this
sounds
stuff.
Familiar.
So, yeah, well, but actually they put this in the manual to say, you really have to drive the point home, because what they're hoping to do is scare the shit out of you, so that you go, oh, geez, I gotta back down. I can't do it. They're trying to make it an emotional thing.
Right.
And so, and this is what happened to you. You had to stand there and do the thing, and.
Yeah. And they want you to feel that way. They want you to. They say, go home and think about it. Sleep on it. Make sure you're definitely going to do it, and you want to do it. You haven't made a mistake, and no one's coerced you to do it. And I thought, yeah, nobody. What do you mean nobody? I mean, obviously there's.
So did you go back? Did you have to go home, or the second time you went back, did you do it, or did you have to come back a third time?
The second time I went back and I did it. I went through the steps. And
just
then what they
powered through
do
it
is they destroy your passport right in front of you. They stamp a bunch of holes in it, and they put void and, derelict and, bad person. And they don't have a terrorist stamp yet, but I'm sure they're going to use that next time, And so I thought, well, that's it then. And then they said, okay, well, your application, you'll hear about your application. And I said, my what? My application? What have I applied for? They said, well, you applied to leave. And I said, well, how does that work? What if I don't get accepted? Or how does this, and they said, we'll let you know, just keep in touch.
I mean, this is an amazing concept, right? Because you're just born, and, you never signed up for anything, but you're born by virtue of just an accident of birth. You're saddled with all these obligations that you never signed up for, and then you have to apply to renounce those obligations that you never signed up for, and wait for that to be approved and accepted by a series of bureaucrats. It's really an amazing concept. It just kind of it really drives home the point of how they view all of us little people, And
once you realize that your package is going off like an application, and it's going to the State Department in Washington, and probably all these bureaucrats are going to review your application, makes you realize you really should write the best essay you possibly can. I thought, boy, I probably spelled some things wrong in there. Maybe I want to take some more time with that. But in the end, what they really do with you is they want you to have the CLN, the Certificate of Loss of Nationality, and they promote that because that's the one document that they can produce. I mean, at this point, I said, so if I am denied or whatever happens, and with my passport, what happens? And they said, well, we would reissue you a new passport. I said, but you're missing the point. I don't want this passport. And I would have to pay for a new passport. There would be another fee involved. So I'm back in the system, and I've lost some money, So anyway, they eventually approved me. It took forever. It took 6 months.
Right, because they say it'll, in some cases they say it might be a couple of weeks, a month, 2 months, 3 months maybe, and again, same deal. You're emailing me after 3 months going, man, I haven't gotten my CLN yet.
Am I in? Am I out?
This is an important thing, right? Because you have to have this document, because this is sort of like the proof that you have, that you can show the world that I'm no longer a U.S. citizen. I have the CLN, the Certificate of Loss of Nationality, and took. You said 6 months?
Yeah, almost more than 6 months. And I really freaked out about it. I thought that when I was applying for foreign bank accounts or whatever, they were going to ask me for this magical document with a raised seal on it that proved that I was out. No one even knows what it is. I mean, I don't know how many people here have even heard of it in this room, but trust me, bankers, they don't ask for it. Nobody knows what it is. Nobody cares. What they do is, if this happened to me recently, I have a VMAT account, and my parents are signers on this account, and so these people said, we're shutting you down. This is just a couple months ago. You wrote about it, you know. And so these people said, just swear, just write this weird little statement down that you're not an American, and it's good enough for our legal department for compliance. So, they may be not aware that this is coming, but having said that, I think that there is stuff coming. I think that you'll find more and more that FACTA is a global presence, that FACTA is going to be, there will be documents worldwide that whether or not you are American or a foreigner that you will have to sign, and you'll do so under perjury or threat of perjury in any country, even if you have no connection whatsoever to the United States. I forget the 8 or whatever it is that that stipulates that you are not an American. So that will become a defining feature, I think, of forward banking and finance in the future.
I want to know what was going through your head when you walked out of there after going through the whole ceremony. Did you walk out of there and think, "Oh my God, what did I just do? I can't believe I did that"?
Yeah, I felt free. I felt really amazingly.
You felt free.
I felt very free. Yeah.
I've heard that from several people as well who have done it. They walked out of there and they said, like, a weight just came off of their shoulders.
Yeah, maybe cliche, but I felt that. I felt incredibly free, and just like I could do anything at this point.
Yeah, and I
it's
remember
amazing the burden that you carry around and you're not aware of it as an American sometimes, especially this type of group.
And I remember you told me this great story not too long after that. I think it was your parents were visiting, and Jess is just a very active guy, like me. We both like to go rock climbing and surfing, these things. Jess is a great surfer, and was out kind of in the break one day, and there was you said there was like some children that were drowning. And you kind of dove in there and went in to go save them and everything like that, and you and your dad were in there together in the rough waters of the South Atlantic off the coast of Cape Town, doing something heroic and everything, and it's like kind of goes to show you that life goes on. It's not your whole world didn't come crashing down, that you could still be this wonderful human being and and do things, and it's not tied up in this piece of paper. Your integrity, your self-worth is not derived from a passport, from a document issued by a bankrupt government. It comes from inside. And so to me, the significance for me when you told me about that was exactly that. It was this, you still are this incredible person, irrespective of what idiotic document you're carrying around. So
it's important to pick your head up. I think after this process, you feel a little bit intimidated and cowed a bit. And you're right. It is nice to just pick your head up and say, "Wow, I'm through. I've achieved something."
Right.
And away I
so
go.
I want to talk about the travel thing, because now you're a St. Kittsian. Yeah, man.
That's right, brother.
and so you also have a lot of unique experience with that. So this is your primary travel document. Oops. And we've spent a lot of time. Jess and I are always hanging out in different places. He was with me in Norway over the summer, and we're always in different places around the world together. And but there's some places you can't go. We were talking about
the U.S.
like the U.S.
We'll get to that in a second.
Well, actually, let's talk about that, because then you went to apply for the visa.
Right. So
you went back to the same consulate.
Follow-up,
right? Yeah, the same consulate.
Remember me?
Strategic blunder number one.
Yeah.
And
I could have used a little friendly advice on that one.
And so he went in to apply, and you eventually got denied.
Well, my advice, the advice that I received was that you should put down roots wherever you're planning to apply for your visa, like anyone who's trying to get into the United States and not steal jobs away from hardworking Americans. You must prove that you're not going to stay there. So I felt that a little bit ironic. I had a passport, my whole life. I didn't want it, and I don't want it again. And I'm certainly not going back to get a job that I could have had like 2 weeks ago. So what's this whole denial thing? But anyway, they looked at they didn't even look at my file, to be honest. It was punitive, in my opinion. They looked at me and they said, "Yeah, right. enjoy the application process. And you have to pay for that. Most people here have probably tried to get a U.S. visa, or some people have, and you have to pay the $120, which you don't get back. And you stand there and you're intimidated, and you don't get to sit in the American section anymore, which is roped off, little velvet rope section of the embassy. Now I'm in the back, like everybody else. And this South African girl just leans over and says, "This is just horrible, isn't it?" And I said, "Yeah, I know, it's pretty terrible. I've been here before, though. I'm a regular."
I was on the other side last time.
I spent 3 hours in that little room over there. She said, "Really? What were you doing in there?" Just being browbeaten. So anyway.
They ultimately rejected it.
They rejected it. They just rejected it on the basis, they said, "You're a third country national, and your roots just don't have the roots here, and you haven't proven yourself." Two things: real estate, you really have to put down some roots, and relationship, marriage is pretty much the two defining
Show that you have
factors.
roots wherever you're living. So
Show that you're
the
not
problem
gonna-
was that you were a St. Kittsian living in South Africa, but you didn't really have a fixed base or permanent home, and you had been there
Correct.
kind of recently, so you couldn't show that you're really anchored to South Africa. So for them, even though you had just renounced your citizenship, 10 days prior, you're a big risk of trying to steal into the United States and take those jobs.
Right. That didn't factor in there at all. So I was
So you were
the bottom rung.
You haven't been back to the U.S. since, right?
No, I haven't.
Does it bother you?
It bothers my brother, I think, more than anybody. He's got 3 little beautiful girls, and I don't get to see them except on Skype. And I think he misses his brother not being around. So I think there's definitely a component of that. My parents, thank God, are real travelers, and they're wherever I go, they go. They've been to South Africa. Yeah, I turn around and there they are. Come on, guys, catch up. And they're nuts. So they're building a boat in Florida right now, and they're gonna go wherever the next spot is, whether it's South Africa or Chile, or they're like everyone here. They're very interested in something new.
And so now you're traveling exclusively with your St. Kitts passport. You have a lot of interesting experiences with this, because I know a lot of guys that travel exclusively. A friend of mine in Singapore is there traveling exclusively with his St. Kitts passport. He doesn't really have a whole lot of problems. You run into some issues from time to time. Just maybe give us a couple of examples, or what's the general theme?
The theme is quite funny, and you have to just relax when you're using a St. Kitts passport, because nobody's ever seen it before. So you're used to flashing your little blue American or European passport, and off you go. Well, they do this thing. Every time I could film it, it would be the same. They look at the passport, and they begin to punch the numbers, and then they go. And then they turn to the person behind him. There's always 2 people, and then they go, "You see this?" And there they go. Every time. And then they say, "Where is it?" And they say, "It's in the Caribbean." And then they say, "Is it a country? I've never heard of it." And I say, "Yeah, it's a country. It's a passport. What do you think this is?" So sometimes I get a little bit annoyed, but really it's amusing, and they're generally pretty friendly about it. And they always look me up in the system, and about half the time they can't find it, unfortunately. The little pull-down tab, where the countries are scrolling. I can't find it.
Because St. Kitts has, could be St. Kitts, or under Nevis,
or S-A-I-N-T.
S-A-I-N-T, or
the
S-T.
best one of all, when I went in I was in Cyprus, and we're going from the south to, I shouldn't call it northern, the occupied territory of Cyprus, and they couldn't find it at all. It just wasn't on their list. So the woman said, "Well, what's it next to?" And I said, "Gosh, I'm really not that good with my Caribbean geography, but I'm thinking something Anguilla, Aruba, just something nearby." And she said, "Okay, how about Sudan?" And I said, "No, don't put me down from Sudan." And she was talking about on the list, because she couldn't find St. Kitts. So she was talking alphabetically. She
Alphabetically,
said,
what it's
"No,
next
don't put
to.
me down as coming from Sudan, please." She found it in the end. It was actually after Zimbabwe. They added it to the list. They haven't alphabetized it. They just stuck it at the bottom, and I got through. I sweated a bit, but that was fine. Worked out.
So it's been over a year now.
Yeah, so I also got pulled out of the line. It was my first time using it. I went through Amsterdam, and they came and grabbed me and said, "We need to speak to you." And I thought, this is a bad idea. I mean, I'd never had an experience. So they put me in the back, and they looked up something in the computer, and I got very nervous. And they came back a little bit later, and they said, "Well, these are very easy to get." And I said, "No, they're not. Trust me. They're pretty expensive." Anyway, so I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "Oh, we just had to make sure that it was legitimate, but it's fine. It turns out you were born there, so congratulations, and off you go." So I said, have you looked at the number of my passport number is 0000574. So I wasn't exactly born there. I think these are kind of new, but they let me go.
So it's been over a year now, right, since you renounced? Is that about right?
Yeah, late 2011.
Yeah, right. So
over a year now.
Yeah, a little over a year, yeah.
Yeah.
Any regrets?
Regrets. Yeah, I wish I could go back and go elk hunting in the fall in Colorado. You know, I was born and raised in Colorado. I miss my home state. I miss my family. That's the big regret. Having said that, I believe in my mind that these people that you know, are still in the U.S. at some point might come down and join me in Chile. So I think maybe I'm breaking trail here, and that's my fervent hope that maybe we'll all join up again and be a family someday. So.
Would you go back and do the same thing all over again, knowing everything that you know now? Would you, I mean, obviously you might improve things a little bit for yourself, make things a little bit easier, might not have gone into the consulate in Cape Town the first time, had them open the file on you, but would you make the same decisions knowing what you know now?
I would have done it earlier. I would have saved myself the effort, the time that I put into all the you know, the offshoring, if you can call it that. I would have done things a little bit differently, smarter, if I had the information about not applying for the visa. Now I have a black mark, and so I mean, you know, if you apply for a U.S. visa and they say, have you applied before, been denied a visa? Well, I have to say, yeah, I was denied. So yeah, there's some things
I will say, actually, the same guy I was talking about in Singapore, Charles on the St. Kitts, he did the same thing. He went in and applied, was also rejected. Same issue, exact same issue, because he had just moved there and hadn't put down roots and all that stuff. And they said, oh, no, you're a risk. He's like, what do you mean I'm a risk? I just renounced this. It was like 3 days ago. And, but he actually went back and reapplied maybe even a couple of weeks later. And this time he came back with all this documentation to show that there was a major change in circumstances. So he checked the box and said, yeah, I was, you know, rejected in the past. However, here's all the changes in circumstances, and came back, you know, heavily armed with his documentation. And he was approved, as a matter of fact.
And I think I remember part of that was a medical factor, or there was something involved.
Right, there was, you know, my father's sick, and this and that, and here's my house, and here's my this, and here's my that. Yeah.
So hey, camp it up, right? I mean, if you know, if
I mean,
you can bring that
killing
in,
him with paperwork.
Yeah, and I wish I had done that. You know, come in with maybe a sob story or two, wouldn't have hurt me. So.
Any parting comments?
If anybody is considering doing this, I would definitely consider, you know, the downside potential. But I think for me, I feel, like I said before, I feel relieved, to be honest. And so I think it's a good thing. I don't know if it offends anybody, their sensibilities to leave your country behind, but my grandfather fought in the South Pacific, and my dad fought in Vietnam against the Chinese, and you know, all these forces of evil and who knows what. And I had to fight the State Department, but I feel like I won, even though I've had my licks. I feel like I came out victorious, and I recommend it to people.
You're a great friend for coming out here. Like I said, nobody talks about this, and you're a really, really great friend for coming out here to do this, and you're a great man, and I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.